Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the ECR Monthly Shopper Insight webinar for May, taking place in June. And the reason for that was we held our ECR Ireland Leaders Forum last week, which I'll go through now in a moment. We have a power-packed webinar for you this morning, so I'm going to go pretty brisk to get through to it. Three great presentations and really strong insights from Gerard in Amorach, Niall in Shopper Intelligence, and Olivia in World Panel by Numerator. And I think it'll be a full hour, power packed full of insight. So get your notepads ready, I would suggest. But I want to bring you first through a little review of our Leaders Forum, which took place last Wednesday in O'Reilly Hall. Great support from the industry at it. We had about 110 people attending. We were hoping we would have more than 100, so we were happy with that. And great support from Irish Distillers, Unilever, Chicken with Attitude, Dunnhumby, Tesco, and the steering group and putting it together. And this Leaders Forum, for those of you that were at it, it's a representation of where the hottest topics in the industry are according to the ECR Ireland steering group, which itself is a representation of the industry with retailers, manufacturers, and service providers on it. I just want to go to our website. And if you go to the ECR Ireland website, this is the page which you will see on the review of the Leaders Forum. And I think it's worthwhile for you to have a look at it if you didn't, because we talked about what we think are the four biggest factors which are going to alter shopper behavior and our sector in the year and coming years ahead. Okay, we kicked off with Hazel Ahern Flynn from IBEC, and Hazel, you can download Hazel's presentation on the website, talking about IBEC's estimation for the year to ahead with regard to inflation, consumer sentiment, and particularly the amount of spending. I think Hazel said with 12 billion euro in savings. Sorry, the amount of savings we had, and what might release that. And really, it is just continuing cost of living crisis might allow people to release it a little bit more. And of course, it's the 80-20 rule. It might be higher, it might be the 95-5 rule in terms of where those savings lie. 5% of the population of 95% of the savings, something like that. But it was massive amount of savings in the country. So we kicked off with the economy, and I know Jared's going to talk a little bit about the economy again this morning. We then went into our first session on hot topics, which was on the future consumer. Moderated by Keith and Dr. Ucker, we Lucy from Dunnhumby, and Scott and Chris from Gate One Havas, all giving presentations, then having a little panel discussion. It was really good. You can download those presentations there. But look out for particularly Gate One's presentation on GLP-1 and their estimation of the shift that it'll have in terms of purchasing patterns and the kind of food which people who are eating GLP-1s will consume during and after they're on GLP-1s. And Lucy talked about using some retail media data, looking at how the future consumers changing their habits and how they purchase both online and in store. Okay, so future consumers obviously very important. The second big one was AI and digital transformation, and no one better than Richie Jones from AWS to discuss what Amazon are, how they are thinking. And I don't know if you noticed, but 3 weeks ago, Amazon ditched their product Rufus, which they'd spent 10 billion on. They ditched it overnight and replaced it with Amazon for Alexa. Amazon Shopping for Alexa. And that will be launched in Ireland soon. It showed how Amazon are trying to keep pace with the development of AI, of shopping agents, and what they're trying to do to keep ahead of the curve. It was fascinating listening to Richie and his presentations available online. Richie also gave a call out that they would like to bring ECR Ireland or members from ECR Ireland over to their 6-month-old distribution centre in Darlington in the UK, which is fully automated and now has drone deliveries, and given insight into how they've come about building this distribution centre. It's enormous. I forget the size and the cost, he said, but it will be a real opportunity to get inside Amazon in one of their global distribution centers with state-of-the-art distribution. Okay. The final hot topic we had was food fit for the future. The movement that we all have towards eating more protein, making sure we get fiber into our diet. what we're doing to measure and track our consumption of calories and nutrients, the growth in wearables, the growth in health tech, and the change in shopping patterns. It was moderated by Chris in Birdseye, and we had Lauren over from Lauren Nomad Foods, come over from the UK. She's a nutritionist, and Kevin with Strong Roots, talking about how the future basket and what that might look like. Okay, so four really strong hot topics: the economy, the future consumer, digital transformation, and food fit for the future. And during the day, then we had a couple of interviews with two senior people. They don't get much more senior than Noel Keeley, who is CEO of the Musgrave Group. Noel's retiring at the end of the year, and talked about not just the hot topics which he addressed, but talked about leadership, lessons learned during his career, advice for other leaders out there. And it was a really personal and intimate interview. And Noel holds extraordinary gravitas in the trade, and he does so on stage also. So it was a wonderful experience to hear Noel be honest and give a reflection on his career and what he's most proud of during his time. And incidentally, what he said he's probably most proud of is how the company and their people reacted during COVID. And no surprise there. And there was an extraordinary effort from all retailers and all people involved in retailers during COVID. Grania Galvin, if Noel is at one end of a CEO career, Grania is early into her CEO career. She's country manager of General Mills in Ireland, and she talked about just personal reflections on what it's like to move into a very senior position. And take over from someone who she regarded as a mentor, and the personal challenges and the doubts, and then the confidence, and how she grew into the role, and how she grows General Mills, who incidentally, Nature Valley, they're very proud to say, are going to be one of the sponsors of the Ryder Cup later on this year. So two extraordinary interviews, and then the whole day was summed up by the co-chairs of ECR Ireland, who are Micheál Donoghue of Tesco, and Paul Kelly of Unilever. Okay, so look out for that. That is available now on the ECR Ireland website, where you can download the presentations, and I would encourage you to do so. Two other things. Now that we've got that out of the way, we're going to launch with full force our ECR Ireland Shopper Conference and Awards 2026. We're kind of growing out of O'Reilly Hall. We had 220 people at it last year. We've decided to invest a little in the venue and in the production quality. So we're going to go to Croke Park on the 8th of October. It's kind of a risk for ECR. It's a big expenditure, but we think it deserves it. So look out. Entries are going to take place in June and July. It's possible we will have a new award category as well, which I think will suit people in their entries. And we are meeting now, and hope probably by the end of the month, to be honest, or maybe mid-month, we will launch the entry requirements. So start thinking about your entries now, and hopefully we will allow tickets to be sold early, that allow people to book their tickets and get a table if they want. Okay. A recent really good webinar was last Tuesday, I believe. You know, the time for discussion on how AI is going to influence is now. And these quarterly role of AI in category management webinars are led by discussion. And we had a really good discussion between Arber from Zenline AI and Stefan, who is the course director of category management at GS1 Switzerland, who are ECR Switzerland. Really just talk about where they think it's going and what effect it's going to take. And I wouldn't turn you off. We got really good feedback from people who did attend. Just under 100 people attended that last week. Okay, that's a quarterly webinar series which we're going to run. Okay, but let's get back to today, and let me welcome on stage Gerard, Niall, and Olivia. Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Declan.
How are you, Gerard?
All good, thank you. Good to be here, as always.
Hello, Niall. Hello, Olivia. So, really looking forward to our day. Gerard, we're going to kick off with yourself. What can we expect to hear from you this morning?
Well, it's kind of a little shorter term focus this time. It's about the rest of 2026. It's been kind of an interesting start of the year. There's positive momentum out there, but there are a lot of signs of it getting bumpy over the rest of the year into 2027. So I want to kind of take people through that. Some very fresh research literally conducted over the weekend, and as well as some forecasts gleaned from OECD published yesterday and a host of other sources. So I hope it will complement some of what you were talking about at your conference last week, Declan, and also and help people this morning plan and think about the summer and the rest of the year.
That's great, Jared. It's nothing better than getting up-to-date information. Let me ask you a question. When you're looking for the economic indicators, we get these indicators from financial institutions, from government bodies, etc. Whose figures do you look out for most?
Well, to be honest, the go-to source for me is the CSO,
Right.
particularly the retail sales index. But in combination, they do the facts, but then in combination with um, the the confidence or sentiment indicators. So both the European Commission sentiment indicators published each month, but also things like the AIB momentum indices around things like construction, services, and the generally manufacturing and the general economy. Those for me are those are little they're like flags kind of indicating, or weather vanes indicating which way the wind
Yeah,
is blowing at the moment, and the combination of those things gives you a sense of just where the momentum is, where the dynamic is, certainly into the short term.
very good. Okay, look forward to that. Now you're going to follow Jared.
So this morning, I am going to take a look at how different shopper groups, shopper demographics behave and maybe act differently throughout the shopper journey within grocery. So it's looking at various behavioral, attitudinal metrics that will hopefully give people a good insight into maybe how we can best communicate with shoppers throughout that journey, whether it's pre-store, in-store, or even thinking about post the shopping trip, and how we can drive satisfaction into the future.
That sounds very interesting, Niall. Look forward to that. Olivia, welcome to the ECR stage.
Yes, thank you for having me. So yeah, today we're going to be looking at what we can kind of expect from, I suppose, that unpredictable summer season. It's one of those, it's not a typical kind of Christmas where we see kind of everyday sort of shopping and what we see every year. So really kind of looking also at what we're seeing now. Cost of living is obviously a key subject and something that we are seeing popping through into the data and shopper behavior, but then also actually seeing what have we seen in previous summer months and what can we kind of expect from that unpredictable season for this year.
That's fabulous, Olivia. Okay, as I threatened at the beginning of the webinar, we've a packed webinar full of insight. We're going to attempt to go 20 minutes each for presentation, which will bring us up to our close time at 10:30. Over to you, Jared. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Declan. So I'm going to share my screen. If I get this right. Okay, you should be able to see that. So I'm going to go into full screen mode. As I said in the brief intro, really trying to figure out where things are going to go over the rest of this year. What are the sources of dynamism, but also what are the obstacles, what are the roadblocks that are there. Deep dive into the mood of the nation, which is a little bit grumpy, to be honest, and see what that means in terms of some of the things that might impact on your business over the rest of 2026, but also into 2027. Well, first of all, look, there's a lot of momentum, good momentum in the economy at the moment, certainly carried through from last year, the first quarter of this year, and that has kind of helped us through a lot of turbulence globally in terms of the things that are going on, including, of course, a second energy shock, the start of a second energy shock. Most of the forecasts for consumer spending are very positive. The only cloud on the horizon is inflation. But again, in a kind of international context, we are doing relatively well, very well indeed, compared to some of our Eurozone peers, for example. But despite those kind of positive macroeconomic headlines, the mood of the Irish consumer has turned much more negative. And it's not just about the economy, it's not just about inflation, but it's kind of about the future. It's something that's happening in terms of that zeitgeist shift, what we talked about before, the vibe session, that kind of challenges the economic headlines. And I think if you factor in the very real prospects of a Q3 energy shock, the impact of GLP-1s, I'll say a little bit about that, and of course AI, and I'll say a little bit about that. And it looks like we're in for a very bumpy second half of 2026. So let's get into some of the economics behind all of that. Well, yesterday, happily for me, the OECD published some new economic forecasts, flexed to reflect some of the uncertainties that are happening globally in terms of the obviously the crisis in Iran, Strait of Hormuz, all of that in terms of the constraints it's posing on the energy sector and downstream costs for food, etc. But if you look at Ireland, and this is just Irish economic forecasts from yesterday, they're pretty stable and steady. Consumer spending last year, 2.9% growth in Ireland, 1.9% this year, down a little bit, 2.3% next year, picking up a little bit. Inflation has gone up, obviously, a lot, 3.5% forecast year end this year, up from 2.1% last year, but it's expected to ease to 2.5% next year. Unemployment, a little bit of a steady increase, but really barely noticeable increases from 4.6% to 5% over 2 years. And the savings rate, out of disposable income, coming down a little bit, but these are still very high levels of savings. And this kind of implies people are still adding to their savings, that Declan reference. They're not drawing down their savings. So despite higher inflation, real consumer spending growth remains stable and steady. Wages and salaries are continuing to grow faster than inflation, and all of this against the background of a fairly stable labour market with little immediate increase in unemployment. But consumers remain cautious, they're still saving a lot of their after-tax incomes, and whilst it's coming down a little bit, it's not enough to feed into consumer spending for now. And I did say we are a bit of an anomaly, and I've flagged this before, and we kind of forget it. I think we take things for granted a lot in Ireland. But if you look at the OECD forecasts yesterday for consumer spending growth in these 5 different markets, Ireland, UK, Germany, Eurozone, USA, Ireland and the US are the obvious anomalies here. We're expecting our growth to be nearly 5, and consumer spending 5 times the UK growth rate. Similarly, 5 times Germany's rate, 3 times or 2.5 times the Eurozone average. And it's expected to continue next year. That 2.3% puts us 4 or 5 times ahead of the UK in terms of consumer spending growth, obviously ahead of the Eurozone, more than twice the Eurozone average, even higher than the US next year than this year. And really what it's telling us is that consumer spending growth prospects are positive, very positive compared to other markets. The UK is in a very fragile place because even a 0.5% increase higher than expected in inflation will wipe out that real increase in consumer spending. Other things could also impact it. And we stand out as a bit of an anomaly in terms of what compared to Germany and the Eurozone, where it's a very modest or anemic growth rate for consumer spending, very vulnerable to even a slight uptick in inflation. But all of that said, all those good positive headlines, consumers aren't feeling it. If you look at consumer confidence up to the end of last month, May, Irish Eurozone confidence, the green line for Ireland, the blue line for the Eurozone. We peaked back in September 2024, October 2024. We've since declined sharply. We're now less confident, Irish consumers, than the Eurozone average. And in fact, confidence in Ireland is kind of back to where it was at the start of the Ukraine war. So despite all that positive headlines, we're actually quite gloomy, as gloomy, and if not more gloomy than our Eurozone counterparts as consumers. The cost of living crisis, of course, hasn't gone away. And the overall rise in fuel and energy crisis continues, and the continuation of the Iran war cast a pall over sentiment in general. And as I said, it's at the negative now as it was at the start of the Ukraine war back in early 2022. So there's a disconnect there at that macro and micro level. On the other hand, Irish retailers are in a completely different place. Much more positive, much more bullish, above the line, as you can see, versus below the line for the Eurozone, and continuing to be quite confident about business prospects for retailers in general, where our retailers are much more confident than Irish consumers, obviously much more confident than Eurozone consumers, partly reflecting our Eurozone retailers, partly reflecting maybe those economic headlines, the buoyant consumer spending, feeding into your retailer circumstances. So it all bodes well for retail sales in general, in the short term anyway. And though the impact of inflation may be hidden in some of these trends, and we'll get to that. Because I think we're in for a bit of an inflationary shock. It's really hasn't happened yet. We've seen some of it, of course, in terms of some of our costs, and a little bit of a uncertainty, turbulence in petrol, diesel costs, all of those things. But it's now starting to feed through into supplier costs, business costs, and other costs. Again, if you look at retail sales, this is all businesses excluding motor trade, seasonally adjusted. So red line is the value of sales, including inflation. Blue line is the volume of sales, excluding inflation. And what you can see is clearly an increasingly big gap. In fact, since 2022, over half of the growth in the headline value of retail sales in Ireland, 55% to be precise, has been simply down to retailers putting up their prices, not consumers spending more money. And in fact, if you look at groceries, this is all businesses, look at groceries, it's even more flatline in terms of the volume of sales. So what it's telling us is that much of the growth that the retailers are confident about is simply down to putting prices up. The trend lines are clear, and there's a widening gap there with inflation simply consuming more and more of the disposable income of Irish consumers. All of this, of course, continuing to contribute to that sense of a cost of living crisis, which hasn't gone away since it really took a grip on the country at the start of the Ukraine war in Q1 2022. And consumers are reacting. They're cutting back. So 80% of people in our survey this weekend agree, I've started cutting back on things I could do without to save money. That's up from 73% in 2 years ago, in September 2024. Women are at 85% agreeing with that statement. 75%, 3/4 agree, I've stopped buying certain brands I used to buy because they were too expensive, up from 72% in September 24. 79% of women agree with that. Nearly 2/3 agree I do less shopping online than before as I can't afford it, up a little since September 24. 71% of women agree with that statement. But it's still not enough. 81% disagree that my income is rising faster than inflation at the moment, about the same as September 2024. 84% of women disagree that their incomes are rising faster than inflation. 71% agree I find I have very little money to spare after I pay all my bills, similar to 24. 75%, 3 in 4 women agree with that statement. And over half agree I worry I won't be able to pay basic necessities in the future, up a little since September 24. Nearly 6 in 10 women agree with that statement. And more inflation is expected. That's the critical thing here. People expect that the cost of living crisis is going to become more salient for them. Irish consumers are feeling the pinch from inflation. You can see it here in terms of inflation, people's perceptions of whether prices are going up. Inflation perceptions in Ireland, the green line, are actually higher than in the Eurozone as a whole. And we were fairly similar right up to middle of 2024. But since then, Irish consumers have been much more sensitive to inflation. Retailers, on the other hand, the question is, how do you expect the prices you charge to change in the next 3 months? Irish retailers are much more bullish about putting their prices up than their Eurozone counterparts. And that aggressive increase in prices is, of course, other things equal, feeding into that inflation perceptions on the part of consumers. So you can see some of the disconnect in all of that. And we're really only at the start of it. That loss of oil supply and all the downstream consequences of that for fertilizer, for growing foods, all of that is really going to come into significant view in Q3 this year. That's going to impact on food prices because of the impact on planting seasons, fertilizer costs, and all of that from Q4 in particular. And interest rates will have to start growing. They'll rise steadily because central banks don't want to trigger a recession, but they are going to rise, and we're going to see that fairly evident from Q4 in light of these other consequences. So this is back to what I was saying about the mood of the nation. All of these things are having a cumulative impact. And we're seeing it in some really quite shocking numbers, again, from the weekend. 62% of people in Ireland agree, I live for today because the future is so uncertain. 65% of women agree with that. 66% of young people agree with that. 68% of C2DEs agree with that. It's the trend behind doom spending, or that you might have seen referenced in a recent article on the RT website. 45% of adults in Ireland agree that Ireland needs fast, radical change, shaking up the system and starting again. Nearly half of women agree with that statement. Over half of 35 to 44-year-olds agree with that statement. Half of C2DEs agree with that statement. We've seen some of that in the recent by-elections. We see some of it in the political polls. There's a lot of kind of anger out there, hence that kind of dark mood. 53%, more than half of people in Ireland think Ireland is on the wrong track. More than half of women agree with that, 61% of 45 to 54-year-olds, and over half of C2DEs. And 60% say that Ireland's best years are behind us. Women in particular, 25 to 34s, C2DEs. All of these things tell us that right now, whilst it may seem very removed from your day-to-day business and commercial concerns, as it is in the abstract, but in reality, in thinking about the rest of this year and how it's going to play out in terms of consumer spending, we can envisage that this is going to have a fairly negative impact for confidence, for spending, and indeed for attitudes towards businesses and retailers who some consumers may begin to feel are not putting their customers' best interests at heart and becoming much, much more sensitive to some of those kind of prices and price increases that, in fact, many of you, including retailers, will have no choice but to force through in light of the circumstances you'll be facing. But it's not for everyone. Again, kind of important to zoom out and understand. 62% of people in Ireland agree, I feel I have enough stuff these days and I'm more interested in paying for new experiences instead. And look at this, 78% of people agree, I'm trying to live a more sustainable lifestyle now than in the past. Up 6 percentage points since September 2024. Even though confidence fell off a cliff then, since then, the percentage who want to live more sustainably has actually gone up. And look at this, 8 in 10 agree that I'm more conscious than before about what I eat and its impact on my health, similar to September 2024. And that kind of cues up my next topic, because there's not just the headline economics, not just inflation issues, and not just the mood stuff, there's not just confidence. There's also other fundamental drivers of change in your market. And again, Declan alluded to this in his introduction, referenced some of the recent contributions to your conference. And it's all about GLP-1. And that phenomenon is something that is really going to have huge consequences in Ireland. First of all, we already know it's impacting on spending on groceries, especially ultra-processed foods, eating out in restaurants, even alcohol consumption. And at the moment, it's obvious that most of the biggest impact so far is in the US, but it is expected to have similar impacts in Europe eventually. 80% of people in our survey this weekend have heard about GLP-1 drugs such as Ozempic and Wegovy. And really interesting, 6% of adults say, I'm currently taking GLP-1 medication on prescription. The question was, GLP-1 drugs are prescribed for people with certain combinations of problems such as obesity and diabetes. Are you or anyone else you know taking GLP-1 medication? 6% in adults, over 1 in 20, say they're taking GLP-1 medication on prescription. 36%, although they're not taking it, know someone who is taking GLP-1 medication. And just to put that in context, it's about 12% of adults in the United States and about 2% in the UK, EU, although there's lots of variation in those estimates and different sources and different ways of calculating these things. But it kind of implies actually Ireland is a little bit ahead of the curve in a European context for the GLP-1 phenomenon. And that's something just to be mindful of in terms of your own thinking and your own planning. Now, we also know we have a serious issue with obesity, etc., in Ireland. So that seems to line up with some of what we're seeing here. But it's still obviously very, very early days. However, 32% of non-users of GLP-1s in Ireland, which is 94% of the population, would take GLP-1 medication, such as Ozempic, if their doctor recommended it for them. Over a third of women would take GLP-1 medication if it recommended. 40% of 55 to 64-year-olds, 38% of ABC1s, those with the most money to spend. And 1 in 5 non-users, remember that's 94% of all adults in Ireland, 1 in 5 of us think we could personally benefit from taking GLP-1 medication. Nearly a quarter of women, over a quarter of 25 to 34-year-olds, and over a fifth of ABC1s. What does that mean? It simply means that as GLP-1 becomes available in other forms, for example, tablet capsule, which is happening, obviously it's already off patent, and perhaps it becomes prescribed more freely, more readily for other conditions rather than specific combinations of obesity and diabetes, then there's actually a huge population of potential users of GLP-1 drugs out there in Ireland, between a fifth and a third. And that is going to have an enormous impact. It doesn't mean, of course, they'll all start taking GLP-1s, but it only means that 6% is the floor in terms of its impact in Ireland at the moment. And don't be surprised if it doubles or even triples over the next couple of years in light of what's happening in other markets and in light of what our Irish consumers are revealing about their preferences. And finally, don't forget AI. We all know it's important, but let's just kind of put it in context. 12 months ago, May 2025, only a minority of people in Ireland were using AI. 43% of adults, 57% of adults didn't use AI 12 months ago. Now, 58% of adults are using AI, a 15 percentage point increase in AI usage in just 12 months. 21 percentage point increase for women in particular. So a huge closure of the gap there. 25 percentage point increase for 55 to 64, that older cohort. 22% for C2DEs. So to sum up, it's going to get bumpy. Consumer confidence signaling weakness in the face of cost of living pressures. Ireland is much better placed than most to navigate the turbulence ahead, but we are facing a combination of factors that will demand some serious strategic planning skills for the rest of this year and going into 2027. And remember, ask better questions, you'll get better answers. Use your research and your insights to navigate the turbulence ahead. Thank you.
Jared, thanks so much. Some brilliant insight there. The inflation shock is due. 54% of people worry about paying bills worry about what's left, I think, after they pay their bills, and doom spending. Never mind the GLP-1 and AI influence. So besides that, things are going to remain normal.
Everything will be grand, yeah. No, look, we're lucky. We have momentum in our economy, so we have a buffer. Our government has a buffer in terms of its tax revenues, as we well know. But we are not we're a geographic island, but we're not an economic island. We can't avoid some of these things.
Okay, Jared, you're going to come back and present at our Shopper Conference and Awards on October the 8th.
Looking forward to that, Declan.
And so are we. I just want to put out a question for everyone to fill in the chat, right? I want to take a statistic on GLP-1 usage now in Ireland, and ask people to predict where they think it's going to go. Now, what figure will we use? I'd heard recently that 12% of households have a GLP-1 user at the moment. Okay, well, let me go with that to everyone online, and I'll type it out in the chat here. If we take that 12% of households have a GLP-1 user at the moment, how high do we think that figure is going to rise to what? Will it be 15? Will it be 20? Will it be 50%, etc.? And we might educate ourselves in terms of how high the usage of GLP-1 might go. Okay, so let's say in 2 years' time, what percentage of households in Ireland will have a GLP-1 user, assuming that 12% do at the moment. I'll type that out in the chat. Okay, Jared, thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. And someday, Jared, I hope we have a positive economic climate that'll allow you to give all the signs for positivity.
I'll contact you, Declan, and we'll schedule something at a very short notice.
Yeah, it's not going to happen in the next 12 months.
No.
That's for sure. Okay. Thanks, Jared. Niall, good morning. Over to you.
Declan, so share my screen. Hopefully you can see that, Declan, if you could just let me know.
Fire ahead.
Brilliant. So thanks a million for having me on this morning, Declan, and great to see everyone on the call. So for this morning, as I mentioned in the intro a little bit earlier, I'm going to take people through some insights around in terms of looking at different shopper groups and how they maybe act differently or behave differently throughout the shopper journey. Before I get into some of those insights, though, just a little bit of housekeeping and a reminder for some people on the call or for people who may be new to shopper intelligence, a little look at exactly what we're looking at this morning. So within our data, we're essentially looking at, and we collect our data through direct shoppers post shopping trip. And we're very much looking at how and why shoppers do what they do throughout that shopping trip. So we'll be looking at various attitudinal, behavioral metrics throughout the presentation this morning. As some people on the call may know, if you've maybe looked at our data at a category level before, we can go into lots of different ways of looking at that shopper behavior throughout the journey. But for this morning, we're going to look at it in a slightly different way, and maybe a way that we haven't looked at before on these particular webinars. In terms of our coverage, so we've collected just under 50,000 shopper responses within the year of 2025, which is the time period we'll be focusing on for this morning, and we'll be very much focusing on the as we would say the big five. So the 5 retailers we see on the screen here. So all of the data we look at throughout the rest of the session will be focused on those 5 retailers within the time period that's been highlighted. We've also increased our coverage, our collection in the year of 2025 to cover also Northern Ireland and also the on-trade channel. So really, I guess, wide coverage and broad coverage across the entire market. So that's just a very little quick piece of housekeeping. As I mentioned, we're going to look at our data in a slightly different way today. And in doing so, we'll be looking at it across demographics. And we'll be looking at two different demographic types. The first is by age, and very relevant actually coming off the back of Gerard's presentation where he referenced different age groups and also different affluence levels. So we'll be looking at across the rest of the presentation how that shopper behavior differs across these shopper groups. As I've said already, I want to do so throughout the shopper journey. So within our metrics, we can look at pre-store metrics. So before a shopper actually gets to the store, what are they thinking about? Are they planning to buy what they buy, or are they more impulsive? When they're in store, are they engaging with their shopping trip, or are they more of a grab and go shopper? And then after the shopping trip, are they satisfied with what they got on that trip, and also what improvements would they like to see for the next time they come back to buy maybe the category they bought or the items they bought within their basket or their trolley. So with that in mind, I want to follow that shopper journey and start off before a shopper actually enters the store, and look to, I guess, address some of these questions that we see on the screen around, are shoppers planning pre-store? If so, what are they planning by? And also, what will actually drive them to shop in a particular retailer, or what will encourage them to visit a particular store? So we look at some of these questions through our metrics across the demographics that I've highlighted already. So where we'll start is looking at simply the level to which shoppers are planning pre-store by age. And really interesting here to see how, as age increases, that level of pre-store planning also increases. So 76% of 18 to 34 year old shoppers are saying that I did plan to buy what I bought before I got to the store. That increases to 85% as we get to that 55 plus shopper. So as age increases, that level of pre-store planning increases, shopping lists become maybe more relevant and more important to shoppers. But I guess conversely, or inversely, you could say, that younger shopper, 18 to 34 shoppers, are more impulsive. They're more likely to be going to a store without that item or without that category on the shopping list. Therefore, if we, I guess, think about the so what, it's around, can we influence them in store? Is there an opportunity to influence them in store when that opportunity may not be as prevalent with that 55 plus shopper? So as age increases, so does pre-store planning. Almost 1 in 4 18 to 34 shoppers did not plan to buy what they bought before they got to the store. And if we think about this in terms of the different affluence levels, pre-store planning only varies slightly across ABC1 and C2DE shoppers. However, what they are planning by pre-store does vary. So as you can see here, we've slightly shifted the dial in terms of moving from age into affluence, but this is very much thinking about, of the shoppers across ABC1 and C2DE shoppers, of the shoppers who did plan to buy what they bought pre-store, what did they actually plan by? So whether it was by a brand, a number of brands, pack type, flavor type, whatever was on promo, for example. And what I want to identify, or what I'm interested in, is the difference between the demographics. Because we can see here across both demographics, planning with one brand in mind has the highest percentage of shoppers across both of those demographics. However, if we focus on the ABC1 shopper, we can see that they over-index for planning actually with a number of brands in mind. Now that could be a branded product, or else a retailer own label product, but nonetheless they're maybe a bit more promiscuous in terms of before they get to the store. They're also they also over-index in terms of planning by flavor or type. So it may not actually be thinking about a brand at all. It could be just thinking about different flavors, different types within the category they've bought, or the categories they've bought on the trip. When we look at C2DE shoppers, a slight difference in that they are more likely to be going with one brand in mind. But also on the right-hand side, maybe expectedly, they are going, they're planning by whatever's on promo. So they may not be thinking about one specific product or one specific brand. It's whatever maybe will give them the best value or the best perceived value when they are shopping in store. If we think about this group of shoppers over here on the left that are planning either with one brand in mind or with a number of brands in mind, we can also look at, okay, within both of these demographic types or demographic groups, what do they mean by brand, or what are they thinking about? Is it an actual brand, or is it a retailer own label brand? And we can see here that 60% of ABC1 shoppers who are planning with a brand or brands in mind are talking about a branded product. That drops to 30% in terms of thinking about a retailer own label product, and then we have 10% who are planning across both. When we look at this for C2DE shoppers, we can see that 60% drops to 53%, with 36% of shoppers planning with a retailer own label brand in mind. So while, as I've said on the previous slide, the level of pre-store planning is relatively similar across both ABC1 and C2DE shoppers, what they are planning by does differ. We also are interested in looking at, well, what will encourage these shoppers to shop in store? What is the driver of traffic amongst these two demographic types? And we do so, and some people on the call will be familiar with these traffic drivers, but I just want to highlight two of them and how they differ across the demographics. The first one is that ABC1 shoppers are more likely to be visiting or choosing a particular retailer because they don't want to run out of a specific category. So I guess there's maybe an underlying fear maybe amongst these shoppers that they will go home and not have something that they need. So very much they are shoppers who don't want to run out of the products maybe that are maybe staples in the house or need that they need to have. Also, interestingly, ABC1 shoppers are more likely to use specific categories as a proxy for overall retailer value. And that is essentially what our price beacon metric means. So while you might think, and while C2DE shoppers might be planning by whatever is on promotion, ABC1 shoppers are more likely to look at specific categories across the store and say, okay, if this category is good value, it will then tell me that the retailer I'm shopping in is good value as a whole. So ABC1 shoppers are a little bit more focused on specific categories potentially from a value perspective or a price perspective. But both of these insights or traffic drivers are very much interlinked with the mission that these shoppers are on. And when we look at the missions that ABC1 and C2DE shoppers are on, we can see that ABC1 shoppers over-index on those larger trolley shop missions, essentially. So whether it be a main weekly shop or else a large stock-up shop. So if you think about ABC1 shoppers, they don't want to run out. They're on a large trolley shop, very much interlinked. C2D shoppers more likely to be on that top-up shop mission. Less items in the basket, maybe only picking up a couple of items that potentially they just need for this evening rather than thinking about the entire week. So already we see some differences even before the shoppers get inside the door of the retailer they're shopping in. And that brings us to when they're in store. And this is really where we'll see differences across both affluence levels and also age groups. And if we start with affluence, start essentially where we finished on the last slide, and we look at our spend drivers. And our spend drivers allow us to identify, are there levers we can pull in store that will really entice these shoppers into spending a little bit extra, a little bit more than what they planned on spending? And we can really see a clear difference here across the two demographic groups, where ABC1 shoppers are far more willing to spend, whether it be on buying extra on promotion, buying or paying more for maybe a more premium or a trade-up option, buy more new or different, so very much around innovation, NPD in store. And finally, buy because I feel like it. That's a more kind of instinctive or impulsive buy in store. If a shopper sees it, they'll buy it. So we can clearly see here where the opportunity lies. It's with these more, I guess, affluent shoppers who are willing to be disrupted in store and willing to trade up or look for new and different as well in store. But not only in terms of affluence do we see some behavioral differences, we also see it in terms of age. And we see it across specifically four of our in-store behavioral metrics. The first one is around the level to which shoppers are willing to browse in store. And we can see here that 18 to 34-year-old group over-index in terms of their willingness to browse in store. Maybe not under as much time pressure. Maybe they might tend to be on their own a bit more in store as opposed to being with kids or with family. So maybe more time to spend. And they are telling us that they are willing to browse in store. They're also more expandable. And expandability essentially means that the more a shopper buys, the more they're willing to consume, or the more they're likely to consume when they get home. So again, more expandable. They also buy more from secondary displays. So again, linking it back to our buy because I feel like it metric that I mentioned on the previous slide, 18 to 34 shoppers are open to that disruption in store. And finally, and maybe the most importantly, there is a risk here. And while they're willing to browse, they're saying that if I couldn't get what I wanted, I will walk away, or I'm more likely to walk away than maybe shoppers over the age of 35. So it's absolutely key for that younger shopper that we are giving them what they want, and we're executing categories throughout the store, especially the ones that maybe they're more heavy, they more heavily buy, that they're executed really well, so that we eliminate that walk away risk, and we ensure that shoppers continue to buy and don't leave the store and maybe move elsewhere, or not buy at all, which is the ultimate risk. But in order to, I guess, satisfy or to align with these behaviors in terms of affluence levels and also in terms of age groups, we need to make sure we understand what shoppers expect. And we can do so by looking at our importance rating. So we ask shoppers across 18 different metrics, as we see here, how important each of these are to that shopper when they were on the shopping trip. And without going through all of them, I just want to highlight some of the differences, first of all, in terms of the affluence groups or the affluence levels, and identify, so where we see some I guess, over indexes. And we do so looking at the ABC1 shopper. And if we look at quality, for example, if we look at these as almost a hierarchy of what a shopper expects when they get in store, quality over indexes with ABC1 shoppers, so does premium a little bit further down, and also availability. So not only are ABC1 shoppers looking for quality products or maybe more premium options that they can trade up to, they also deem it as being more important than C2DE shoppers, that they can find what they expect to find, that what they want is available on shelf. Also, in terms of age groups, and again, a lot of detail here, but just focusing on some of the metrics and very much focusing on that 18 to 34 shopper, some of the areas that over-index to them versus the 35 plus shopper, let's say, are being able to easily identify value. So the communication of price and promotions absolutely key to that younger shopper. Also, they are open to premium trade-up options, and also at the bottom here, enjoyment. So making the shopping trip enjoyable. As I said already, they're open to, or they buy more on secondary displays. So activations, signage, theatre in store will boost and enhance the shopper journey for those particular shoppers. I also want to highlight that 55 plus shopper on the right hand side, because there are a couple of areas that are more important to that shopper than the other age groups or than younger shoppers. One is quality. So 55 plus shoppers do want quality products, more so than actually price. So they actually deem quality as being more important than price, which is not the case with the two age groups to the left hand side. But also Irishness. So shoppers within that 55 plus age group deem Irishness as being more important than the 18 to 34 or 35 to 54 groups. So as we can see, in terms of that hierarchy of expectations, you could say it differs from an affluence perspective, but very much so in terms of age groups. And identifying these areas, especially within categories that are maybe more specific to a specific age group or a specific affluence level, are absolutely key, because we want to give shoppers what they want, and we want to meet those shopper expectations. And these lists here very much show us that hierarchy of expectations across both demographic types. So that's touching on the in-store shopping behavior. I then want to touch very quickly on post-shopping trip, or after a shopper actually finishes shopping, and just look quickly at shopper satisfaction, and also what shoppers would like to see improved for the next time they come back to shop. And in terms of shopper satisfaction, I want to have a look at quickly overall satisfaction across age groups back since 2020, right up until our most recent period. And really interestingly, here we can see how the gap in shopper satisfaction across ages has really widened over time. So back in 2020, there was only a 3 percentage point gap between age groups. It's now at 14%. As we can see, that 55 plus shopper has become far more satisfied over the year, really since 2023, where we had some inflation and availability concerns. But that 18 to 34 shopper in the long term has actually declined in terms of satisfaction. So are there ways we can drive satisfaction with that younger shopper going forward? And to identify how we can do so, we can look at our desired improvements, which are around what would shoppers like to see improved. And interestingly here, you can see for 18 to 34 shoppers, they over-index on all of these desired improvements. So they want improvement everywhere. But I just want to highlight two areas that are the highest for those shoppers, which is innovation and pack sizes. That's what they would like to see the most improvement in. And looking at the same two slides for an affluence level very quickly, we can see here not too much difference actually between affluence levels in the long term. The year we saw the biggest gap was when we had those inflation and availability concerns, where that C2D shopper was far less satisfied. But in the long term, not as much of a difference in terms of satisfaction across affluence levels. And in terms of our desired improvements across affluence levels, I just want to highlight a couple of areas that do differ across ABC1 and C2DE. The ABC1 shopper is calling out for more improvement in that in-store experience, so layout, signage, theatre, and information, whereas C2DE shoppers over-index in terms of looking for helpful staff. They want support in store. Maybe it's support in terms of looking for where the best promotion is on, or where a category is located. But very much, if we're looking to target or identify those more affluent ABC1 shoppers, getting that in-store experience right is absolutely key. So that's everything from my side. It was a little bit of a whistle stop or a whirlwind tour, but I do have a one-page takeaway that people can have a quick look at if they're looking to, I guess, identify some of the key call-outs from the previous slides, but also the call to actions, or the so whats, in terms of how we can identify those shopper behaviors that have already been mentioned and then turn them into action moving forward for your specific category or categories. So that's everything from my side for this morning. I hope that was insightful and you got a couple of nuggets that will hopefully be helpful. So yeah, thanks a million for your time, everyone, and look forward to hearing any questions if there are any.
No, that was brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Declan.
Look, it's great to get that overall view and segmenting by affluency and by age. We don't often see it, and of course you have so much data to back it up, in that they really are stats that people can rely on, and are across categories. But people can pick what is relevant for their categories.
Exactly.
Really brilliant. You can see by the amount of virtual hand clapping you're getting is very much appreciated.
Thanks very
let me
much.
go. Let me go. In the interest of time, let me welcome on Olivia. Thank you so much, Niall.
Brilliant. Let me just share my screen.
And I see Ronan's got his hand up. Ronan, I'm going to kick off with Olivia and get our presentation done, and then I'm happy to hang on, and maybe Olivia and Niall are just for a few minutes over time, if that works.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Niall. Thanks, Ronan. Hi, Olivia. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So yeah, for any of you who don't know me, I'm Olivia Lynchbury. I'm a client executive here in World Panel by Numerator. And today we're going to be really kind of looking at the new rules of summer and how we can actually really win that unpredictable season. And I suppose in today's session, we really want to just empower brands to win in summer, which we do see as a traditionally quiet season for shoppers. However, unpredictable behavior can be that challenge, as we'll see throughout, that whilst there are more opportunities in store, it's actually harder to get into shoppers' baskets. So kind of even bouncing off of what we've already seen previously in the session, the use of promotions, availability in store, but also actually how we can segment our untapped shoppers as that new rule for winning overall. So what do we know about summer? I suppose naturally we see a break in routines for Irish shoppers as we see summer holidays, meaning kids are at home throughout the week. We also hopefully go away for a week or two during this summer sort of period. The weather gets nicer. We never do know with Ireland, I suppose, but I think even last week we really saw that lovely weather coming through, and in turn we all kind of get a bit happier. We sort of see more socialising, whether that's throwing a drinks kind of get together or kind of a dinner party with friends, and in turn really kind of honing into that hosting season. But what does this actually all mean for shopper behaviour? So when looking specifically into summer months, we do typically see a drop in frequency highlighted in those yellow boxes, and spend per buyer also plateaus. So shoppers going on holidays for a week or so means their trips in stores naturally, where we would have seen 2 or 3, have dropped. And despite, I suppose, this most frequent summer that we saw in 2025, we actually saw, yes, that kind of those trips dropped throughout the summer period, but the trips in store were much higher than they were previously for the likes of 2023 and 2024. And we've actually seen that shoppers have continued to go on one more trip per summer period, with it now actually sitting at 67 trips within that 3-month sort of summer period overall. But it's also obviously important to look at what we're currently seeing, and I suppose, again, looking at how this can impact our summer months. So as we know, the cost of living has been an ongoing discussion. I think it's definitely been brought up in the last 2 presentations, which just shows and highlights it even more. But we can actually see even further from our pressure group analysis that we have here in World Panel, those kind of cohorts of shoppers. So we have a cohort of panelists who use our panel voice survey, and they are able to group themselves into struggling, managing, or comfortable based on their preferences and how they kind of apply to the statements that we offer, such as struggling are just making ends meet, or on the other hand, comfortable feel they can afford most things in that kind of day-to-day run. But we're now actually seeing that over 1 in 4 Irish shoppers are now struggling financially. What we're seeing is, despite a drop from November from that 31%, naturally kind of coming into that Christmas period where budgets may be tighter, we're actually seeing this as being quite a big jump from the same period last year. So Feb 2025, we saw that 23% of shoppers were struggling, when now in turn we're seeing 26%. But on the other hand, this with our comfortable shoppers, whilst they do feel they can afford most things, and again, lie for around that kind of 1 in 4, we actually see that 50% of them are still expressing their concern over the rising cost of groceries. So again, where we may think that these are kind of our shoppers who will continue to kind of buy, and the rise of kind of groceries aren't too much of a concern, we're actually seeing that value to all shoppers is really key in these upcoming months, especially with that rise of inflation. So actually looking into that current grocery inflation, we can see that inflation has started to slightly rise again, currently sitting at 6.7% overall. Yet we can actually just sort of see that despite an increase in inflation, we only see spend per buyer increases, again through higher price purchases in store, and we aren't actually seeing any volume-led growth, as shoppers now are actually buying less. So as a result of this, we're actually seeing shoppers going on more trips versus last year, with the highest trips we've historically seen in a month period, with that now sitting at 23.6 and a growth of 3.2%. Yet they're actually taking smaller trips this year, despite spending nearly the same on groceries. And so we're sort of seeing that packs going down by 3.4%, but spend per trip only going down by 6 cents. So again, showing how it's even more important now to ensure your brands are getting picked as these 1 in 10 sort of packs in a basket when shoppers are in store. And it's really key about that loyalty now, as shoppers now feel they need to also kind of sort of spend the same as they were last year, but ensure that they're getting that value from their basket. So leading us into looking how sort of shoppers actually manage their spend with these current pressures. So as we can see, promotions and loyalty cards are kind of key favourites. Struggling shoppers opt for cheaper groceries, with 74% of them using that as their preferred method. However, when we look into our managing shoppers and our comfortable shoppers, again making up about 75% of all Irish households, we actually see that managing and comfortable use deals this year to really help combat their spend, as shoppers still want to buy what they previously have, but so it still fits in their budget this year. And what's really interesting, again, with that comfortable shopper is last year they've actually jumped from a 54% preference to now this year a 65% preference for loyalty cards. So again, really showing how key it is in store to make sure we have those promotions available, but we've also got them on that loyalty card. So actually leading us into our promotions, the way brands can win. As we can see on that left-hand side chart, frequency really continues to rise, meaning there are more opportunities for brands to be chosen. However, with smaller trips being taken place, and again, that promotional growth of 0.8% in packs, we can actually see it's now harder to get into those baskets. With those smaller options and smaller trips, it's really all about kind of visibility, and people continue to buy on promotion and making sure we have those in-store activations, which is really key to entering shoppers' baskets nowadays. Because as we can see, 1 in 4 brands are now purchased on promotion each month. That is an over-index of our total grocery, which lies at just over 22%, with promotions actually also now coming later into the year, especially through that price reduction, which has grown the fastest for promotions. So again, just dropping that price in store. I'm sure we all see those bubbles in store when we're on our shops, but we actually see that kind of sort of price reduction really growing the most in terms of actual spend. Brands on promotion have also increased this month versus sort of the previous month when looking at April 2026 versus March by just under 25% of growth, really highlighting that shoppers are now more likely to buy on deal. Coming into the summer months, they're delaying their sort of promotional purchases and entering promotions later into the year. And now when we look at that spend share of brands and private label in the grocery market at a 4-week ending period, we really start to see the new dominance of brands in the market. This is actually the largest gap we've seen between sort of brands and private label for this time of year, as brands now hold 50.4% going into that 19th of April read. So coming back to those trips in stores on the right-hand side, we are still seeing that whilst there is that dominance on brands, there's an everyday reliance on private label, with private label making its way into more baskets throughout a month. And this is really typical for what we see throughout the years. But focusing in on that branded growth, and it is one where we can really win those shoppers overall, we're actually now looking at our top branded growth segments, starting with that hosting season, and again, a key time for us to be coming into the year and sort of the season of summer. We really see that wine and spirits are showing that key incremental growth. We see Wolf Blass growing as well, especially within that wine segment, as we come into that season of hosting. Treating is a big seasonal segment all year round, as we know, and we are seeing that chocolate is seeing the largest incremental sales versus last year. Now, again, Easter data will obviously play into that, but we are seeing that Cadbury's is really showing through and kind of shining in that area overall. And then finally, with that barbecues, I'm sure we've already had a few of them with the lovely weather a few weeks ago. But with fresh meat, we're actually seeing that being brought on brands, and brands coming through with that additional 8.1 million euros. And we've seen that also coming through from Finnebrog's brand Naked, which has risen by 600,000 euros overall. And actually pinpointing in on one of these seasonal occasions. So actually looking into our alcohol purchasing, and I think a very key topic is already been brought up, I know, in Jared's sort of presentation as well, as we are seeing kind of evolution in our sort of alcohol sector overall, and we can really start to see how that is evolving through these trended charts. When we look at our penetration stats on the right hand side, it's actually the lighter categories which are seeing more shoppers buying into them, and we can actually see that it's all other sort of alcohol segments are actually seeing a reduction in shoppers versus this time sort of 3 years ago. And as mentioned previously in this sort of session, we also know that GLP-1 can be a key influence on this and stop kind of that evolution of the alcohol sector with less shoppers buying into it. Because when we actually focus in on those key summer sort of trends, and again, focusing in those yellow boxes, we actually see that in the summer months, beer sees the highest number of shoppers and highest number of households. Yet in 2023, we saw that 48% of all Irish shoppers were buying into beers and ciders. Yet in summer 2025, we saw just over 43%. So again, a 5 percentage point reduction in our shoppers. Mixers did actually grow in shoppers over the last summer versus where they were sort of in 2024 and also 2023. So again, it's really interesting to see this trend coming into summer 2026 of those lighter sort of alcohol segments. Because when we actually focus on this split, and again, focusing in on those lighter segments, which we're really kind of seeing rising now, and they are a smaller sector of our alcohol share, as we can see with non and low alcohol holding 2.5% of the alcoholic category, and then our pre-mixed drinks holding 2.1%. They are massively seeing growth, with non-alcohol now actually worth 7.4 million euros over the last 12 weeks, which is a growth of 100% versus 2023. And with our pre-mixed drinks, we've actually also seen a really strong growth of 43% using that same time period, meaning they now see 6.3 million in those 3 months. So now actually taking a deep dive into these segments and sort of seeing these segments that are growing, especially going into those mixers and using West Coast Cooler as an example. So West Coast are actually seeing huge gains in shoppers, having increased 5 percentage points versus 2023. And I suppose when you think of West Coast Cooler, you might think of maybe a girls' night or a drink that does hold a low ABV and that lighter alternative. But it's also an extremely nostalgic drink, and this is where West Coast Cooler are especially seeing growth. It's known for its 80s roots, and we're now actually seeing a rise in shoppers aged between 55 and 64 who may want some of that nostalgia back. By introducing new flavours, they've really enabled to sort of bring West Coast Cooler those new shoppers through different life stages. And it's really about looking at our different buyers. Where are we seeing that growth? How can we continue to see that growth? But it's really now all about, can we understand even more about our actual non-buyers, and can they help kind of create our growth and penetration even further? And this leads me on to that final piece of, and I suppose a recommendation for West Coast Cooler, which is a segmentation. And this can actually be used for any single brand or retailer in the market. And as we can see, we segmented this by alcohol shoppers, for instance, but we can continue to keep going further if we want to see those lighter alcohol purchases. But a segmentation would really just give them a better understanding of their product and sort of positioning in the market, and help make it easier to target the greatest group of those untapped shoppers. Because as we go into those summer months, the timing is really key, just so we can really see where, but also most importantly, who they need to target for that exponential growth. And just, I suppose, wrapping up onto what we've seen and what we can expect from the unpredictable summer season. So as we know, summer does disrupt routines. Shoppers are less predictable this time of year around and aren't driven by routines. So brands sort of need to show up by that occasion, not that habit, because that sort of goes out the window during that summer period. And really winning those summer moments by bundling those products within those key occasions, such as that barbecues, that hosting, and also that treating, where we do see a lot of kind of, I suppose, even cross-shopping or kind of that trip duplication, which we see in. The new normal is that little and often that we're seeing, again, driven by that inflationary increase. We're seeing now that shoppers are going on more frequent, but also smaller shops, which gives you more chances to win. We need to see that as that benefit. We're getting shoppers into store more often, but they're also seeing smaller sort of a smaller basket when they're in store. So it's really all about that in-store visibility to win those smaller baskets, and having those end of aisle displays, which we know are so popular and so beneficial to sort of manufacturers, is really viable at this time of year. And then finally, we're seeing that fragmentation of repertoires. So shoppers are now becoming more selective, as we know from our pressure group survey. They are more value driven, they're more kind of concerned about that rising cost in groceries, and loyalty can't necessarily be guaranteed during these summer months. So the use of those targeted promotions, kind of that I touched on at the end of the session there, really kind of informed by shopper segmentation, will really help to unlock new buyers and those missed segments and untapped shoppers that we need to ensure our brand stays relevant. So that was everything from me, but leaving you with what's coming up for World Panel. So on the 24th of June, we have our brand footprint hosted by, I suppose, our brand footprint expert, Emma Healy, where she will be unveiling Ireland's most loved brands, but again, looking into ways where we can unlock even further growth with an introduction into our Catman analysis to age with this. If you haven't been sent an invite, please do get in contact with Emma with her details there at the bottom. But yeah, again, thank you so much for listening, everyone. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. And again, you can get access to this desk by this deck, I suppose, by getting in contact with any of your client service reps.
Well done, Olivia.
Brilliant.
Thanks
Thank you,
so
Declan.
much. Thanks so much. Look, a really, really interesting pointer in terms of how summer is different. Focus on shopper missions we need to have during the summer months, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
as you say, frequency is reducing. So frequency is increasing, and basket size is reducing. So people are in the store more often, but more planned for shopper missions. And therefore that points towards altering category management during the summer, altering brands needing to stand out and differentiate themselves for the summer missions, and stores who, some stores do a great job in terms of whether it's party or occasions or barbecue, but the point really well made. Thanks, Niall. Thanks, Olivia. We don't have any comments at the moment. Olivia, unfortunately, your event on Wednesday 24th is the last Wednesday of the month, which clashes with our Shopper Insight webinar, which is on the last Wednesday in June. I know we've got Future Proof Insights going to present and a couple of others that I'm waiting to confirm. So thanks, everybody. Well done this morning. That was packed. We're finished bang on time. It was packed full of information, and we will see you hopefully next month. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.